You know that I've thought quite a bit. I think the media, the field of the media, is a very, very important one for all of us, for all our lives. And as you know, I'm very, very devoted to bringing only quality to you, quality and the finest and the best. Because when you go out into the business world, I want you to be well armed with the things that will make you successful and keep the level of fashion, marketing, merchandising high. And the media plays an important part in every aspect of living, whether it's marketing or advertising or even fashion, because I know you see fashion shows on television being reported. Today's guest speaker, in my estimation, I have watched her and followed her career on television. Not career, no, but I've listened to her and I've admired her immensely because she has integrity, she brings quality to everything she does. You'd have to watch her. You know, I'm speaking about this afternoon's guest speaker, Miss Carol Jenkins. She is the finest, and that is what I call good media, good reporting, great honesty in whatever she does, and a dedication to many, many interesting projects, not only reporting the news, but she's always active in the cause of young people. And I know she will talk to you about all that, so I won't keep going on about how much I admire her. She has won an Emmy Award in 1996 when she joined Fox 5 as co-anchor of the Fox Midday News. I hope you've listened to her at 12 noon. She's just wonderful. And she also anchors for Good Day New York and the station's top-rated The 10 O'Clock News. Before coming to Fox, Ms. Jenkins spent 13 years with WNBC, most recently co-anchoring News Channel 4 at 6 p.m. and contributing to News Channel 4 at noon. Throughout her career at NBC, she was involved with almost all of the station's newscasts and anchored news segments for NBC's Today. Notable for her coverage of national political events, Ms. Jenkins has interviewed President and First Lady Hillary Clinton and Vice President Al Gore. She has also done global news, filing live reports from South Africa on the release of Nelson Mandela, and hosting a one-hour primetime special entitled South Africa Steps Toward Freedom. Recognized several times for excellence in broadcast journalism, Ms. Jenkins was named the recipient of the 1990 New York Association of Black Journalists Lifetime Achievement Award. Also won an Emmy Award in 1983 on the report of the Mayanas Bridge collapse, a UPI award for spot news reporting on the collapse of a Bronx building, an Associated Press award for spot reporting on Gorbachev's sudden departure from New York in December '88, and a Long Island Press Club award for her special report on sexual abuse. Ms. Jenkins holds a master's degree from New York University and a Bachelor of Arts from Boston University. She is the mother of 2 children and one of the most outstanding people that I know. Ms. Jenkins.
Thank you very, very much for that introduction, and thank you all so much for being here. I hope that what this can be is an exchange of ideas. If you have any questions, think about them, grill me. I'm ready for them, although I wasn't in the side office of the Oval Room, so I can't tell you definitively what went on there. Although certainly we have enough information, dumped on the internet so that gives us some sort of glimpse. I have been in the news business for almost 30 years, which I would venture is older than a lot of you in this room. But last night, when I was watching the Janet Jackson concert, I don't want you to think I'm that old, you know. I mean, I was watching the Janet Jackson concert, having given my tickets to my kids, right, who begged, oh, you're not going to know what's going on anyway, you know, let us go. So they went to the real thing, and I watched the concert. And what, was anybody there? Did anybody get to go? Okay, the hands are up. So this was quite an adventure. And I thought about, because someone said to me, you know, Janet Jackson reminds me a lot of Madonna, and I was trying to, you know, think, well, they both sing and they both entertain, they both have lots of dancing, and I guess it's the style that's the thing, you know. And I see you, the ones who are, you guys are in fashion, you know, style, right? So it's this. What they both have in common is that they are high style. Now, and they are high style, and they have evolved. I was thinking of the audience and looking at the faces and in that audience, and most people expect for teeny boppers to be in a Janet Jackson concert, and I didn't see very many teeny boppers. You know, they were older people. What's happened is that not only does she have high style, but she has evolved into a more adult. And you can disagree with me, you know, when it's your turn, and I welcome that disagreement. She has evolved into a more adult high style. Now, the last time I met Madonna, which was I only saw her once in my life, and I'll tell you, I have two stories like this. And this was many, 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 many years ago, because she, at that point, only had one song out, right? And it was like a thing that they just repeated. She repeated the same words over and over again. I don't know, so I go on a holiday, right? You know, so I hear this song and I'm thinking, this is a star, you know, this is music. But the reason that I met her in a dingy little club in Chelsea before it was, you know, the fashionable place, was because of a very serious news story. And that was a graffiti artist by the name of Michael Stewart, and this predates you all. He was a gifted artist, but he chose to display his work on subway cars and on the walls of the subway stations. And the police department objected to his self-expression. He wound up dying in an altercation in a subway station as a result of his graffiti art. But his connection to Madonna was that he had been a backup singer, backup dancer for one of her early videos. And so I go over to the club, where I'm told that this, you know, the hot new singer is going to talk to me about her friendship with Michael Stewart and her regret, her outrage, as many of us were outraged at his death during that time. And I meet her, and what I sense is not only high style, but also high emotion. And the conversation that I'd like to have with you during this hour is about that. You know, the qualities that go into high style, presenting an image, the kinds of instinctual, inspirational things that are a part of that, and the emotional quotient of that. For sure, I did not predict that Madonna was going to be the sensation that she was, you know. And I have the other example of that was that very early in his career, I went out with the actor who is now known as Robert De Niro. And we were both extremely young then. And he said, you know, one day I'm going to be a famous actor. And I say, oh, sure, you know. And the next time he called for a date, I turned him down, much to not only to my great regret, you know, but my daughter, he was furious with me, you know. He said, are you telling me that I could have been Robert De Niro's daughter? I said, you wouldn't have been the same person, sweetheart. So that my record for spotting true raw talent, is not exactly, right on. But we will have that conversation. If you're asking about style in the news business, and you always wonder, now why are they wearing that? Well, just in our defense, I do want to say a couple of things. Is that we are restricted by the technology, really, in terms of what we can wear. For instance, some of the most fabulous Armani patterns, I used to love those, but they would drive my director crazy. He would say, I don't care if it is Armani, you cannot wear it on the air because it's, zigzagging, we call it moraying, and that means that it sets the technology off, and it's a thing that you simply cannot wear. Pink is a color that does not go over very well in most places, but especially on television. Plaids and stripes and accessories and all of that stuff that you would think, boy, this would be terrific. It's a great-looking thing in real life. When you see it on the television screen, it becomes a completely different, distorted image. So that when you see us wearing solid colors, minimal accessories, no patterns, all of that is dictated by, the bubble hair, is sort of, in fact, there's a radio commercial on it, whether you've heard it, about the male anchor and his hard hair, I mean, the spray is a part of the anchor life, at a certain stage. When you guys come through, perhaps a lot of that will change. But that, in terms of a uniform, if you will, is what we are expected to wear when we do the news, because above and beyond anything else, we want you to take us seriously. And so serious often is reflected in a very staid manner of dress. Conservative, I mean, one can be conservative in one's dress, not in one's opinion. The 28 years that I have spent in the news business have taken me through an enormous swing. If you can imagine, I was talking with some colleagues about the early days of TV. In the old days of TV, when there was film, I don't know whether you even remember that. Well, you go to the movies, so you know that, but that's the way the news used to be done. We'd have to go out with a 3 or 4 or 5 person crew. We'd shoot film. The film would have to be brought back to a station. It would be developed. It would be physically cut and physically spliced back together. And then if we were lucky, at 6 o'clock, we would have a story to tell you. As opposed to the technology that we have now, and I say that all news now is developing news, because we have 24-hour news stations. We have the 5 o'clock news, the 6, the 11, 7 o'clock in the morning. News happens all of the time. And as you know from the developments in Washington recently, news is presented to you on almost a 24-hour basis. So that what that means is the story that you're getting is more up to date. It's breaking, it's developing, and sometimes what that means is that it's not the full story. So that in the old days, if I had 12 hours to put a story together, I could tell you what happened. I knew what happened at 10, but you didn't know. I knew what happened at 12, the addition to that development, but you didn't know. I knew what happened at 4 and at 5, and then I could give you at 6 o'clock the distillation of all of that, and we'd come to some conclusion about what that story was of the day. But what you're getting now and what we are presenting to you now is news as it happens. Now, there are some good things about that, because you get to decide, what you think. You get to assess for yourself. And I know for a fact that the viewers of the news are much more sophisticated and much more able to separate what they think is the truth from the non-truth. But what it has created in the news business is an impression of, and when they go and do the polls, who's trustworthy? Do you believe the news? Well, very often now I think that we as newscasters suffer, in our assessment, and suffer in the polls because of this developing trend, so that our story at 10 is not our story at 3, is not our story at 6, is something else has happened by the 11 o'clock news. So the technology has changed my job. It's made it easier, in that I don't have to develop film and I don't have to worry about whether it's going to be lost forever. It's there. But it's also changed the perception of viewers in terms of whether or not we are believable. And what's so interesting to me is that I just came across a poll that said that local TV anchors, if you can tell me if you agree with this or not, are more trustworthy than the print journalists or the network journalists. Now, is that something that you would, because here's the rap that I've always heard about local news. The only thing we care about is crime, the latest body bag, what ridiculous stuff that doesn't really matter to us. Well, in the recent poll conducted by the Roper survey and the Newseum says that that's what viewers want to know about. They want to know about what happened in their community. They want to know if they're safe, which has to do with the crime issue, and they want to know about their local government officials, not so much about the international things, although it is my contention that the international has become the local. It is very hard to deal with any story that does not have a local component to it. I just recently, as I was coming here, as a matter of fact, ran through the Columbus Day Parade, which kept me from getting here earlier, ran through a scaffolding accident, which I suppose you will hear about tonight on the 6 o'clock or 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock. I hope if you're 10 o'clock, you're turning to Channel 5 on the 10 o'clock news. I crisscrossed through 7 neighborhoods that had ethnic qualities to them, that I know people who live in those neighborhoods are affected by the news that's going on in Yugoslavia or in the Caribbean or elsewhere, so that our world has gotten to be tremendously small. So there's not that much difference between the international and the local. Everything can be interpreted in a local sense. Let me just go through some of the stories, because I do want to get to your questions. Some of the stories that I covered, the very first interview that I did when I started in this business, if you can imagine. Does anybody know who Angela Davis is? Everybody, oh, well, but it's any of the young people know who Angela Davis is, and the Black Panthers and the whatever? Okay, anybody know who John Lennon? Does anybody know who Geraldine Ferraro? Oh, okay, now we're getting down to the latest thing. The most significant news story, the story that sort of defines one's career, took place when I went to South Africa and interviewed Nelson Mandela. And I was just recently looking at a documentary that Jonathan Demme, who is directing the new Beloved, did on Nelson Mandela. An extraordinary, you talk about the improbability of heroism. If you can imagine a man who did not deliberately, at least in his youth, determine that he was going to become a hero, certainly had no idea that he was going to spend 27 years in prison, who was adopted by a king, an African Zulu king, and then by lawyers, became a lawyer, and then spent the next 27 years of his life imprisoned. Well, now, I was standing outside of his house in Soweto the first day that he got out, and was walking around and looking at the people and at the young children as they ran up to him. And to me, it was the most significant news story that I had ever covered. That night, when I was hooked up to my IFB to report for the 5 and 6 and 11 o'clock news. This is what I heard, now having traveled halfway around the world. I'm hooked up and I'm rehearsing my lines, and I'm saying this, in this momentous day when Nelson Mandela gets to walk the streets of his neighborhood, I hear in my ear, Carol, stand by. Donald and Ivana have just broken up. Your story is moving down in the rundown. So often the stories that, and at that entire week, I got farther and farther down, so that towards the end of the week, oh yeah, Nelson Mandela, 27 years, but boy, who's going to get the house, in the Trump divorce? You probably have questions about the news and about fashion, if you will, whatever. Please ask them of me, and I will try to give the answers to you. Yes. Do we have personal stylists? Well, sometimes on some news operations, they will occasionally bring someone in to give guidance on what to wear. Not usually. Now, what you always have to do is separate the news shows from the interview shows. For instance, I guess Roseanne or Rosie O'Donnell or Good Morning America used to be produced by the entertainment division, so therefore people could provide clothing to the on-air personnel. Entertainment Tonight, you'll see at the end, wardrobe provided by Perry Ellis, whoever. In the news, we're not allowed to accept clothing. We're not allowed to wear anyone's clothing. We are to only wear our own clothing. Occasionally, someone's contract will include a clothing allowance. Occasionally, a consultant will be brought in, but generally, no. I mean, a news director will say, that looks horrible. Don't wear that. Wear this. It's got to be plain. No scarves. Nothing that calls attention to itself. We want just the news, and we want you to be believable. So basically, there's not a lot of high style given to the news. Yes. How do I dress when I go out? Well, it's a good question because what you don't want to have happen is that you don't want to be seen particularly racy and flamboyant even in your private life, because people may come to the conclusion that you're not trustworthy. I mean, the only thing that we have, in our business is our credibility and our seriousness, so to speak, so that you'll find that most journalists try to stay within some realm of propriety. That doesn't mean that there are not a few of us who have wild streaks, but I mean, I don't feel particularly constrained, but I would think twice before I would wear the see-through, well, for a couple of reasons, those extra pounds and the whatever. But, I mean, there's always the thought. And, in fact, we have in our contracts generally a clause that says that if we should ever embarrass the station, then that would be cause for firing us, so that we have to, stay decent and within the confines of propriety. Any other questions? Whoa. Paco? Yes, go right ahead. Where and how do we get the stories? A lot of it is from our own sources. People call us up. That's the best kind of story that you get first that no one else knows about. We have wire services. We've got sources positioned throughout the city. Got lots of cameras up. Did you know that there are? I mean, it's how they can give you such instantaneous traffic and weather assessments. There are cameras positioned all over. We read the newspapers, 5 or 6 newspapers. We decide from that stories that we may have missed, stories we may want to delve into. But a lot of it is people calling up and saying, did you know that this was happening? That there's a problem with a child and the family is not paying attention, and we want you to come over. So a lot of it's the reliability of the news organization that will induce people, to call and give us tips. But certainly one of the reasons that if you turn into any of the stations at the same time, we've got essentially the same lead story, is that the bulk of our sources are the same, and that's the wire services. Yeah, okay. Is it a tense job or is it a relaxing job? Well, certainly the tense part is when we have breaking stories, and so you don't know what's going to happen next. On a normal day, when your broadcast is set about a half an hour before you go on the air, and you know what stories are in your rundown and you know what to expect, that's a relaxed day. When you've got to go to Washington, or you've got to go to a live remote to a breaking story, now that's really tense. And when you have no idea what anybody is going to say, whether they're going to say something that's broadcastable or not, if you go to the scene of a riot and you don't know what will happen, I mean, that's tense. So that, that's when we're really put on the spot, because we do not have a broadcast delay on the news. On some of the programs that you'll see at night, there's like a 5-second, 3-second delay so that the censors know, to like press a button and eliminate the curse or eliminate the, whatever it may be. But in our news, there is no delay. Okay. Yes. The qualities for news reporters. Well, nowadays you have to know the technology. There's always the debate whether or not someone needs to go to 4 years of journalism school and then get to do 2 more years for a master's and all of that for journalism. What I always advise is that it's better to be a specialist and expert in some area. If you're doing fashion, if you're doing design from your point of view here, then that is a better approach, to have a depth in a specialty, because the technical aspects of it you can acquire on the job, in the internships, and I definitely recommend that. I mean, if there is an internship program, if there is a page program that you can enroll in, that should be the way to go. I think a couple of the people who are enrolled in the page programs at NBC, I think, are now running the company. So they have management trainee positions if you're interested in the corporate level of that. But you've got to be inquisitive. You've got to read those newspapers. You've got to watch television. You've got to listen to the radio stations, including NPR, WNYC, where they're able to do more in-depth coverage. C-SPAN is a fabulous resource for you, and the internet as well. I'm sure you're all online so that you can go right to the source. But the key is information, and the key is knowing how to get a hold of information, developing contacts in the government or whatever your specialty is. You've got to come with a Rolodex. You've got to be able to call your contacts up and say, I've got this story. I know who to call. I know who the person in the agency is who's responsible, and I can get to that person. So, even as you're going about your, work as you do it now, the contacts that you make, you develop, your reel, so to speak, your Rolodex, and you say, I know who the hot designers are, and I can get them on the phone in 5 minutes. Can you do that? Oh, sorry. Yes. Are the possibilities high to get into this business? Yes, because there are so many more outlets now. You have New York One, you've got the 24-hour cable outlets. It is unlikely that people just coming into the business will start in New York because it's the top market, but there are a zillion of them across the country just looking for people. And that is absolutely the way to do it, so that you come into the city with your high style perfected. You make all of your mistakes out of town. It's the road show, so to speak, so that when you get to New York, you will be able to move into one of the key slots. There's a debate about whether or not a reporter should start as a writer or as a producer, and that's always a chancy thing, especially if you're really good at it, because you'll get locked into that, and it'll be hard for the people that you're working for to see you in another position. You know, we always say it's better to start out of town in a very small market as a reporter and then come to New York, as opposed to starting in New York as a writer and then trying to make the transition to, you know, to on air. Everybody, I mean, there's always the exception. People can do it, but it's a business that puts people in tracks, and it's very hard to move them out. One of our executive producers when I was at Channel 4 is now reporting on Channel 11, so it is possible to do, but that doesn't happen very often. No, I didn't interview John Lennon. I covered his death. You know, unfortunately, in our business, you know, a lot of what we do is aftermath. But no, I didn't have the pleasure of interviewing him or going out with him either. Which then. The program that I'm doing on women's health on October 24th, thank you so much for asking. This is a WNET, a Channel 13 special, which is quite, usually people are not allowed to do things on other stations. I work for Channel 5, and you know how that works. I mean, I could do anything within the Fox network, but they will allow us to do public television. And on October 24th, beginning at 6 o'clock, we're doing 5 hours of programming, documentary and interviews on several aspects of women's health, including menopause, depression, a very big, a really important documentary on women in depression, on women of color and breast cancer, why our survival rates are not as good as others. But I think for this time around, it's the depression quotient that's really very interesting to me, because I mean, women have more depression anyway, but a lot of the illnesses also lead to depression, and also the caretaking of other people in our families leads to depression. The responsibility is enormous. And we just did a story on our show last week about a poll that was taken in Cincinnati of women over 40, and over 60% of them had no idea what menopause was or what the hormone. I mean, we would think, well, we've heard about this a zillion times. Of course, everybody knows. And they didn't know what hormone replacement therapy was. Now, that's over 60% of the women over 40, which is why, you know, I am pleased to be a part of Channel 13's effort, because we really don't know. And the truth of the matter is, no matter what segment of the population women come from, they basically tend to neglect their health. You know, this has just got to stop. And a part of that will be the phone banks where women can call up and get referrals, because even if they say, okay, I'd like to take care of my health, now what? What this program will do will be to allow them to get a referral for the next step, you know, to give a list of names. You're concerned about you might have ovarian cancer, you might have breast cancer, so that they'll be able to get some information. But it's important. And that's really, I serve on the board of SHARE, which is an organization for women with breast and ovarian cancer, and the Ms. Foundation for Women, which started the Take Our Daughters to Work program, but which also gives money to women's health organizations across the country to do just that on a very local basis, to make sure that women are taken care of. That's October 24th. Thank you. Yes. Well, actually, it was 23 years, you know. I was willing to let it slide, you know. But when I came into the business after having a bachelor's and a master's, I started as a secretary, sitting out in the hallway at CBS, and went from CBS to Channel 9 as a researcher, writer, then reporter, then anchored a show there called Straight Talk with Ellie Guggenheimer. a very, she's a very good friend, a wealthy woman who lived on Park Avenue. And the premise of that show was that she would be the Park Avenue Brahmin and I would be the radical young African-American woman with my afro. But the truth of the matter is that she always was and still is. She's in her 80s now, way more radical than I was, you know. So it made for an interesting dynamic. She used to feed the Black Panthers and, the dinner parties and whatever. But, if you don't know who Ellie Guggenheimer is, look her up sometime. She's she just recently took me to dinner at Planet Hollywood, like for someone who's 85, willing to risk that kind of an evening. She's a really classy, adventurous woman. So I did that show at Channel 9 and then went to ABC Network as a network correspondent and lived out of my suitcase for a year and then decided that I wanted a family and that was not going to work because they literally would put you on a plane and it would take weeks. If you ever wonder about the network correspondents that you see and why so few of the women will have families is because when you get on that plane with your suitcase, you really have no idea when you're coming back. So then I spent the next 23 years at NBC and did everything there was to do. I anchored the 1 a.m. news, I did consumer, I reviewed theater, I did the politics, I did everything. And then I said, well, I can stay here for the rest of my career or I can try to do something else. And opted to fly to Channel 5. Of course, there was the enticement of my own talk show written into that, and I said, oh, sure, another talk show is just what we need. And that lasted briefly, but I stayed at Fox to continue doing the news since, the news is the source, is the basic skill. But I think I stayed at NBC for 23 years. It's a highly unusual career, and I did it because I was a single parent raising a family. I couldn't move them. I didn't want to move them from city to city. But the way most broadcast careers are constructed is that people, instead of the plane and never know when you're coming back on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, it's sort of you start on this trail across country. You start in a small market and you work your way up. So that I don't know very many people who last more than 5 years or 10 years. There are a few certainly anchors here in our market who do that, but basically that's not. The nature of the news business is that you travel. You move every 2 years, every 5 years, because those are basically the way the contracts are written. We're sort of year hires. The first contract that I had in the business was for 13 weeks. And they still give those kinds of contracts out, and they say, we'll hire you for 13 weeks, and if you work out, you can stay. And then they give you another 13 weeks. And then if you get really good, they may give you 26 weeks, and then you get up to a whole year. And then there's the 2-year, the 5-year, and then way down the line, someone may get a 10-year contract. Or as Gabe Pressman at NBC has a lifetime contract. Gabe Pressman has been reporting for 50 years. He's a remarkable. There will be no other Gabe Pressmans, I don't think, of people, with a continuous non-break 50-year reporting career in one market. He's only been at NBC and at Fox, interestingly enough, and back to NBC. Yes. I'm sorry, the last part. I think the question is, what do I find most interesting? Well, I would say the human interest stories. I do not enjoy expose, and I suppose that's I've participated in a few of those, but if it's a really bad guy, if it's a really bad organization, if it's a really heinous crime, you get some satisfaction in getting them out of business, and getting them in jail. But I don't enjoy it, because it's not a good journalistic journalistic instinct to think, well, this guy has a family, he's got a wife and innocent kids, and he's going off to jail. I mean, it's really an enormous responsibility when you take it upon yourself to say, I'm going to put this guy behind bars, and I'm going to go with an undercover camera, and I'm going to, I don't enjoy. I've even participated early in my career in a howling pack. If you've ever seen that, where the reporters sort of chase a person down the street, and I remember this guy, I mean, for nothing really, big, but we decided that we were going to just nail him, we wanted the answers to the questions, darn it, and he was going to have to tell us. And we literally ran him down the street and pinned him against a light post, and I remember, thinking, my God, this is not what I got into journalism for. The result of those stories really put a serious crimp in his life. I mean, the man hadn't done anything, I mean, it was more in the sense of failure as opposed to an outright crime. So I don't enjoy that, and I would guess it would be the human interest stories, and stories dealing with kids, and that has been my, the story that I would most be interested in going after. 15 years hence. Thank you for being so optimistic. I love that. Actually, I see myself in independent production. I consider that to be the next step. My own media company, producing for myself and for others. Just as the segue of the career. Another gay pressman, I want him to have that gold ring of the 50 years of reporting. But I have some very interesting projects that I'm working on now that I think will be exciting in the next year or two, to do. Yes. Is there a future for fashion, for merchandising? Well, absolutely. Well, there are always the fashion shows that are always covered, and I think that this can be something that if you're interested in broadcast television, that you can, develop a definitive way of doing that. There's the internet, which is going to be a marvelous opportunity for you all. I think it's looking at to get back to the opening statements of your own high style, your interpretation of what is already there, to get a new twist, on what's presented. I think you've got to come up with something new rather than just to say, well, Giorgio Armani was and here's this and the. I mean, that's your major task. I think is to make it new, to bring some new aspect to it, and and it has to come, from your fresh eyes, your perspective on, on a very, almost everything that we do now has already been seen forever, but what we're looking for, new talent, people who can put a fresh perspective on it, and I'm sure that you'll be able to do that. Yeah? Yes. My favorite fashion designer would have to be, I still like Armani. I don't care if I can't wear it on the air or not. And, of course, what you find is that you have a lot more Armanis before you have kids, So if you're going to buy them, they last, buy them. And, because I always said until recently, the last good suit I had was before my kids got into, into junior high and college, So, but Armani, what can I say? Is that what? Name some other designers for me. Who's the hot new designer? Who's your favorite? Oh, Sonia Raquel. Anybody else? Name some designers for me. Oh, Carolina. Yeah, night. I understand he's been here. You've heard. All right, listen, I just want to give you this one last example, and hopefully I was telling Dr. Papazian that perhaps she can come and talk to you. I have a very good friend who, have you guys heard of Urban Decay? Do you know? Do you know that? Do you know the story behind Urban Decay? The woman who put it together. Here's what I call a class. She's a friend of mine. Before you insult the line, but I went to Oxford University to take a class in women's literature, just a week-long class. Where we discussed several writers, and I sat next to this woman, and no matter what the subject was, she always brought up Jane Austen. And several others of us kept saying, what is it with this woman and Jane Austen? Well, as it turned out, she had, and she was, not quite 40 then, but had bought the estate that Jane Austen's brother lived in. Now, if you've ever been to England and seen the house that Jane Austen wrote her stories from, it's about as big as this podium, a little bit bigger. Tiny little place. This is the way things were done then. But her brother had inherited the manor house, rolling estate and hills, and was right up the road. Jane Austen and her mother and sister lived in this little house, and the brother was up the hill. Well, my friend Sandy Lerner bought the hill, the estate, the manor house, the church where Jane Austen attended, services, the entire thing, and is turning it into a women's scholar center. She's busy collecting the early 1600, 1700 women writers, and is collecting the manuscripts, and will invite women scholars to come study there. This is just south of, not far from Oxford, south of. Well, anyway, her money came from Cisco Systems. Do you know that? She was a computer nerd, and she and her husband, when they were students at Stanford, I'm telling you this story so that you can, this is your future, this is going to be you. We'll be telling the story of you. She and her husband, when they were at Stanford University, could not talk to each other through their computers, and they were on different ends of the campus, so they devised what are known as routers, which allowed their computers to talk to one another. And then it was discovered, boy, that's a pretty good idea. So that is the source of networking, and the company is now worth billions of dollars. She and her husband are now off on other things, and the other thing is Urban Decay. Now, Urban Decay, which, if for those of you who don't know, is a line of nail polish and cosmetics with I think the colors are called Bruise and what else? Roach and all of that those kinds of uncharming things. But and what she always says was that this was an improbable route that she took, and I hope that you will have the pleasure of listening to her. She was a computer nerd, not necessarily because she wanted to be, but because she understood that to be the future. She created a company that changed the world, the way we all talk to one another every time we go online, and we are using a part of a avenue that she and her husband Len, in tinkering away in their garage, and at Stanford University, devised. But then she went on to do the things that she was really interested in: a women's scholar center, buying the brother's estate, so that women will finally have an opportunity to occupy that space, as opposed to down the hill and then the tiny little house. And then, because she's a multifaceted person, said, hey, let's now have some fun, and then created Urban Decay. So, I would hope that that's the kind of vision that you all have, to know that, if just the thing that you do is not, that it's not a narrow thing, that there are so many things that you can do, and then so many things you can do with the money that you make from your designs or whatever, but to use them. Sandy Lerner says that, I didn't originally get to do what I wanted to do with my life, but now I can support 50 women studying the area that they want to study, a neglected area of literature. So I tell you that story. Hopefully she will come here one day, and hopefully there's another Sandy Lerner out there, or 25 of them. So we will look to hear of your contributions in the world. And thank you so much for inviting me here today.
Terry, why is that group?
Definitely be in touch with you. It's so great meeting with you today.
Thank you.
Okay. Give the 2 minutes, that's fine.
No. 9:32 was your time. Thank you so much. Okay, we are going to take a 10-minute break. So. Oh, I was like, what did I do? All right.